Well, so far, Mexico's government, indeed Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum, has encouraged to retain a cool head and a measured response to these tariffs. But 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium is nothing but bad news for Mexico, I'm afraid. This country exported more than $7 billion of those metals to the United States last year, and those $7 billion representing more than 80% of Mexico's total steel and aluminium exports as a whole. And steel industry insiders who I've been speaking to over the past few days say that these tariffs are not only targeted specifically to hurt American industrial rivals such as Canada, for example, which exports an enormous amount of steel to the United States, as well as Brazil and Mexico. So all of this flies in the face of North American free trade when America's direct neighbors are impacted by this. And steel and aluminium, indeed, in Mexico are very important manufacture sectors, representing around 10% of this country's total manufacturing GDP. Yet it is an industry which has been through this before. Back in 2018, all those years ago, back when Donald Trump was president under his first administration, when he began these trade wars with these tariffs, it was the steel and aluminium imports to the United States which were the first target of tariffs back in 2018. Those did an enormous amount of damage to Mexican steel and aluminium industries back then, and if they come into play now, they are expected to do just as much damage now in 2025.
Well, Alastair, Trump has weaponized the tariffs as a means to get concessions on other issues, and he delayed a general 25% tariff on Mexican goods until March, after Mexico agreed to send troops to the border. Then comes this tariff on steel and aluminum, and Mexico is a top supplier of steel to the U.S. So how would you describe the public mood towards the U.S. now?
Well, you're absolutely right. And there is a very famous expression in Mexico from a president who ruled this country more than 100 years ago, which says, "Poor Mexico, so far from God, so close to the United States." And that's the exact mood which is being in play here. Mexico, more than any other Latin American country, depends upon its northern neighbor economically, socially, in terms of justice, in terms of security, for these reasons. And it's now that the Mexicans really see Donald Trump's administration as preying upon that vulnerability of this country, of its dependence upon the United States, in order to bend this country towards the will of the political elite in Washington. I mean, as you rightly mention, what would Trump and what would trade tariffs and steel tariffs and imports have to do with the plight of millions of refugees seeking to move through Mexico in order to plead for asylum in the United States? In many other regimes around the world, those would be two entirely separate economic and political topics, but not under Donald Trump. He uses tariffs in order to send Mexican troops, 10,000 of them, to the border, troops which are needed elsewhere in Mexico, as this country lives through a security crisis with cartels and narco-trafficking organizations which are terrorizing local populations. Those troops are needed there, but as a result of this ongoing Trump conflict, as a result of trade, those troops are not where they are needed by the Mexican people. So, of course, that's causing a great deal of resentment here in America's southern neighbor.
Well, thank you very much, Alastair Babstock, for bringing us up to date from Mexico City.